Welcome to another edition of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast series. This is Ray Berghouse, and today's guest in the studio is Warwick Brown, one of Australia's most successful racing car driver exports of all time. Welcome to the studio, Warwick.
Well, thanks, Ray, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and share a bit of time after all these years.
Yes, we've known each other for a very long time. We'll get to that a bit later. But as a professional racing driver, I mean, you had a career which is most unusual in the context that I think you're a little bit like Billy Brown, never owned a racing car. I think that's most unusual, even in the days when you were a hero. But let's start at the beginning because, I mean, in effect, there are two guys who unfortunately are no longer around in our game, Pat Burke and Peter Malloy. And those two names loom large in your history. So let's start with them. How did they actually come into your orbit?
Okay. Well, a little correction, Ray. Pat is still with us. In fact, he just rang me about 10 minutes ago, so I know he's there. And he's doing well. We talk weekly. Unfortunately, Peter died several years ago. But for me, the story starts in 1969 when I was 19. And, you know, I was truly blessed. I still pinch myself and have a hard time thinking how did it happen? But anyway, Pat was the man that basically paid for my racing career. And Peter Malloy was the one that saved me from killing myself and made me into I assume, a thinking racing driver.
Yeah, that's an interesting term, isn't it? A thinking racing driver, because I mean, a lot of people talk about instinct, the reflexes, the ability to do these things without thinking. I think really that that's probably okay at club level. It's okay in just general sort of, if you would, national motor racing, but internationally, I think it's a different game altogether. So those two guys are the fellas who brought you into the game. So let's just say that Pat was the guy that encouraged you to go motor racing. Now, where did that actually start?
Well, Pat was my neighbour when I lived in Warwick, in my family home, and he'd been very successful in the Poseidon mining boom at the time. I knew none of this. He was an accountant, a certified accountant, and he had an interest in motor racing. And we started off just talking at Christmas functions and stuff, and ended up driving to Bathurst a couple of times to watch the October race. And I think it was on the third trip that he suggested that had I ever contemplated being a race driver. And yeah, well, no, not really, no. He said, well, you know, so that sort of laid the egg. And so then we had a difference that Pat said, look, we'll go and buy Formula V. And I said, no, you're kidding, you've got 40 horsepower, you know. And I had a very nice little Lotus Elan in those days. And I could make that thing, you know, do circles and what I wanted to do. And so I had my eyes trying to find one of those. And as fate then would have it, one of my best friends was a fellow called Graham Murphy, and he had a beautiful sister, Mary. And, you know, Mary and I had a bit of a session together and worked together for a few months. But Mary was pretty difficult. She was high maintenance, and she had a bloke that was after her called Andy Frankel. And Andy happened to own this Formula 3 Brabham. So one day we just went and had a look at the Brabham, so I thought I'll do a deal. He better take Mary and I'll get the car and see. I think I got the better deal.
There's not too many people who can swap a girlfriend for a racing car and get away with it.
Yeah, no, that was just the psychological stuff. We obviously paid money for the car. But it was a nice little car. It was a BT6. It was a Formula 3 car. It had a 1100cc whole bay push rod thing with about 92, I think, horsepower from memory. But I do remember the first open race meet I went to was Warwick Farm, and round the long circuit at Warwick Farm, I was about as quick as Fatty was in the Mustang. So
with less than 100 horsepower, you know, that's sort of, I guess, one of the I suppose the tenets of motor racing is how you learn not to slow down, in the context that it's all about keeping up the speed through every possible corner.
Sure.
Because the bigger, stronger, more powerful motor cars, the heavier motor cars, more of a point and shoot exercise where you sort of stop, turn the corner and then accelerate again. In a lightweight little motor car like that, you would have been trying to keep the speed up pretty much every corner.
Yeah, it was like having a weight on the end of a string, flinging it around, and you're trying to figure out how to fling it around faster than anything. But the moment you got any tentative or anything like that, you were just gone.
Yeah.
So, but I got to tell you, I mean, that time I thought I was driving the fastest thing known to mankind, and that was, and I only was in that car for about maybe 6-7 months. I got second, I think, on my first race. And I won my class every race after that. But I was racing against blokes in 2.5 litre climaxes and in 1500cc twin cams. And here I am in my little 1100cc whole bay thing. But I loved it.
It's a great little car and a great car to start your career because, I mean, very few people start a racing driver career in a racing car.
Yeah.
Most people, it's either a sports car or a touring car but, this is really quite unusual. And that little car, that was parlayed into a Brabham, an ex-Niel Allen, ex-Piers Courage, McLaren M4.
Yeah, well, Pat had obviously, I mean, Malloy wasn't on the scene back then, but Pat got very enthusiastic about all this and decided that I'd shown enough that I needed a better car. So eventually we bought, or Pat bought the M4A McLaren, which was the ex-Niel Allen Piers Courage car. And so I went from 92 horsepower to 245 horsepower. And the only problem I had was that what coincided with that is a thing called 5000s turned up. So all of a sudden I was racing M10B McLarens and I was going great round the corners, but of course on the straights they were leaving me by 15 or 20 car lengths.
Because that little car, that M4, that was the car that Courage drove here in 69?
In a Tasman. I might have been the years before that, a bit before that.
Maybe 68. Yeah.
But what they did, they decided that maybe I just need a little bit more time to get a few more rough edges knocked off me. And we had a guy called Len Goodwin that went and drove the M4A. And what happened with the mechanics, they prepped the McLaren, but my car, I missed 2 races, and I eventually went around to Pat and said, look, this is not the idea of the thing. I'm not getting any better watching Len drive. It's as good as he is. So fine. So next thing they put me in the car, and that was it. And probably maybe less than a year later, I was in a 5000.
Yeah, because, I mean, it didn't take long to go from that car to a Formula 5000. The first car was an M10B, a McLaren?
Yeah, it was the ex-Niel Allen car again, but we bought, Pat bought it off Alan Hamilton. And I remember in those days, Neil was driving. I think Frank was just at the end of his career, and Kevin had one. So I turned up in this thing, and now I'm less than 2 years in my motor racing career, driving something with 500 horsepower up my back. And then I was on a giant learning curve, and really I was looking for somewhere to go and kill myself, really. And that's not long after that, that's when Malloy turned up.
So Pat employed Peter to come in as the engineer for the team, I assume the head engineer, and he turned out to be a life coach.
Well, I'm not sure if he wanted to, but Peter was a fascinating character. We became lifelong friends. We also had a very tempestuous relationship. We fought a bit. But Peter, I talk about, he saved my life, really. But interestingly enough, after I was with him, that's when I had my big accidents. But God knows what would have happened if that had to happen. Because I remember the first meeting we had, Pat organised we had to meet him down somewhere for lunch, and we did that. And I walked in, and I knew him, but didn't know him, so Peter Malloy, Warwick, Brown, blah, blah, blah. And straight away, Peter just looked at me and said, listen, son, he said, you got a big set of you-know-whats, but you're an effing idiot. I said, okay, well, not too many people in those days would say that to me. But I thought, okay, just this guy, I thought gold came out of his mouth, so if I got half a brain, I should listen. So I did listen to him. And then he went on to embellish that a bit and said, look, he said, you don't use your head. I said, okay. And he said, but then came the carrot. He said, if you would listen to me, he said, I think I could make something of you. So I said, right. And Pat was all for that. So that's how the Peter Malloy relationship. He then became not just the engine builder, but he became the team manager. And what he did, the biggest thing he did to me, he gave me a thirst for mechanical knowledge. And I used to drive the engineers mad because I'd be there at 11 o'clock at night when they were working on the car, asking them dumb questions, and they hated that. But that set me up for the rest of my career. I became a fanatic about car settings and what did what, to the point that I had to know when I went back to my motel and they'd done a change in the car, I could sit in there and visualise it and think it to okay, tomorrow it should do this, that, and the next thing. And when it started to happen that way, I got reliable. I thought, well, I'm learning something.
It's interesting because Malloy, I think, you and Pat must have managed to persuade Peter to leave Niel Allen because he was Niel's engineer.
Yeah. Niel, circumstances conspire. Niel was virtually retiring or had retired because Niel got hurt a few times too.
Yes.
And so it was fortuitous for all of us.
So, I mean, it's interesting because as you said, you're only 2 years into a motor racing career, 2.5, getting on towards 3 years, and you're already up there with the heavy hitters.
Yeah.
So the McLaren M10, that lasted, around about 2 years?
No.
Not even that?
No. I reckon I got into McLaren. Well, the first Lola turned up in for the 73 Tasman, so we got it in about December 72, and I think we probably got into the McLaren in mid-71, probably a year and a bit.
Year and a bit, yeah, okay. So, but that was the McLaren, the M10B was a pretty good motor car. It was the very first good Formula 5000 car.
Oh, it was a great motor car, and I didn't know what it was like to drive a dangerous car, but I didn't care in those days. Oh, I'll just get it and throttle it to death and it'll be fine. But it taught me a lot. One of the biggest things it taught me, and God bless him, was Frank that did it. As I started next to Frank on the grid at Warwick Farm one day at some race like Horrendous Trophy or something. And Frank was in his Matich, which was I think it was in his Matich.
The A50 probably.
Yeah, and wow, so anyway, he beat me into the first corner, but drivers, you always know when you're making a guy try harder than he wants to try, and I could tell Frank was not happy. He was having a terrible time. Anyway, I followed him around and tried to overtake him going into the corner, would you believe, or coming out of the corner onto the main straight. What was that called?
Ledger.
Right. Flat out in fourth gear, I remember that. Anyway, I got a bit close to him and got a wash of his air, and I spun twice and... So, anyway, I didn't hit anything again, and I finished second. But I came back to the pits and I said to Malloy and Pat, I said, listen, you get me a decent, not a decent car, but a current, competent, competitive car. I said, I can run with anybody, including Frank, because I've just learnt that from Frank. Yeah. And I told them why. But I never told Frank that, but I had a good relationship with Frank, a great relationship. I used to call in, see him, and he was always helpful and trying to give me tidbits and stuff. So he was a real good guy.
Oh, he was. He was a fantastic guy. So, in the sort of chronological sense, we're up to 1973. As you said, late 72, the first Lola arrives, T300.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that was an interesting set of circumstances because it was a really good-looking car. Pat managed to get Target as a sponsor.
Yeah.
Now, that was a very big first. I mean, Frank had got Rothmans as a sponsor, which was huge.
Yeah.
And because we are talking the early days of sponsorships, because really didn't start till 68. But big name sponsors like Target were very thin on the ground. What was that like? I mean, I know that John Smales had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, John really should get the credit. John was our promotions manager then, and it put a very professional package to Target and did all the support stuff, the tent and the T-shirts and all that carry on. He used to try and get me in the line about what to do and how to behave myself and all the rest of it, which was probably a bit difficult during the day. But the Target thing, I don't remember the numbers now. But I know that it was a massive number back then. I think it was one of the largest, probably the largest sponsorships ever done at that time for Formula 5000. I also believe it was probably Target's first foray worldwide into motor racing. Like in America, they do it, breakfast, lunch and tea now. But anyway, so that was the good news. So we go off to New Zealand, 4 races in New Zealand for the Tasman. And all of a sudden, I think I didn't win a race, but I was looking like I could. And I was finishing 4th and 5th and 3rd and stuff. And And I came back to Australia. I don't think I was leading the thing, but I was right up there. And I thought, I got a shot at this. And it's the first one I've ever been. But I kept saying to Pat and Muller, I've got a competitive car now. You know.
So the 4 races in New Zealand, we had Pukekohe, Wigram, Levin and Teretonga.
Yeah.
Okay. Those circuits were pretty agricultural, to say the least, at the time.
Oh, they were. I mean, Levin was a goat track around a race circuit. I mean,
and of course, Wigram was an airfield.
Wonderful place.
Yeah, very, very fast because it was absolutely flat. I can remember some of those corners coming around past the hangars where the concrete would change levels by about 6 inches.
Yeah.
And you'd basically not so much jump over the concrete, but the concrete would fall out from underneath your wheels.
Well, Wigram was interesting. It was an operational Air Force base, like 362 days a year. For 3 days a year, it turned into a race circuit. And it was very wide. I remember, I think they used to call the corner going onto the main straight Bombay. And we were doing something like 180 miles an hour down the straight to Bombay, 3 abreast. Scott, it was good stuff. You know, it was great racing. It was fun. It was really fun.
Yeah.
You know, to race there. I actually set the lap record there. I can't remember if it was 73. Might have been the next year, 74. But anyway, I set the lap record there, and it's really probably the place that I started to get a bit friendly with Cassius, Graham McRae. And he was an interesting character too. And I had a good relationship with him too.
Oh, when he burst on the scene in 1970, when he came over from New Zealand with his M10, and I don't think he was actually called Cassius until he got to Australia. But the Australian journos picked it up very, very quickly. But you're quite right. I mean, he was a character, purely one-off. There was nobody even remotely like Graham.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because, you know, when you reflect back of it and you dig into it, you know, the better they were, the more flawed they were in a way. And of course we can't judge ourselves. I'm sure there's lots of people tell you how flawed I was, but Cassius definitely was flawed, mainly in the area of he was maybe it was a product of it being a Kiwi that they at the end of the food chain, because see basically what happened to Kiwis, they could do everything. You'd have 3 guys on your team, yeah, and all of them could do everybody's job.
Yeah.
Australians would do the same thing with probably maybe 5 guys. And when we went to America, they'd have cast 1,000. It was a dozen blokes. They're all doing what these 3 guys in New Zealand did. But Cassius was, he was like in 1973, that year, he was Rookie of the Year at Indy. He was the European Formula 5000 champion. He was the American L&M Formula 5000 champion, and he won a Tasman. I mean, and he had a Formula 1 drive. I mean, there's nothing left.
Yeah, so the classic underachiever.
Yeah, but he wasn't short on confidence. He had a great.
Oh no, he was big on confidence.
No, in fact, this is a funny story. This because I love thinking about the human side of racing, you know. And I first started to rattle mentally. I'm talking about Cassius through the advice of Derek Bell, and we were racing at Long Beach. I think in the 1975. Prelude to the Formula 1 race there. And we were all staying on the Queen Mary. The promoters had put us all up there. It was a great weekend. And I'm standing there and I'm talking to Derek and never who. And Cassius was booking in. And he was there. And Derek said to me, he said, "Oh, there's Cassius there." And he said, "You know how to get up his nose, don't you?" I said, "Oh, no, but do you know how to do it? You let me know." He said, "Yeah." He said, "If you ever see him with a girl, just go and make a fuss." I said, "That's it." He said, "That's all you got to do." I said, "Just do it." So every time I ever saw him with a girl, I'd go up and have a chat with her, blah, blah, blah. And I promise you after that, I used to see horns come out of his head. He couldn't be logical or, you know, he was man-possessed, you know, and that's all I did. And, you know, but I didn't I went to see him in his nursing home in his retirement. So I wasn't an enemy or anything like that in his mind. I was still friendly. And I went to see him and, Graham Lawrence's brother, organised it. They did wonderful. Brian and another gentleman, I can't think of his name now, took over all Graham's affairs because Graham fell into very hard times.
Yes, he did,
and it was very sad. And I went to see him. I was flying in those days. Went to Auckland, and Brian picked me up and took me around to see him. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and anyway, it took us about 10 minutes to get them to open the door. Then we went to Graham's room, and they got him up, and it sort of took another 10 minutes to get him all compos mentis. And And they obviously had him pretty well medicated, poor bugger. And anyway, he turned around and looked at me. He started to smile. And Brian said, "You know who this is?" He said, "I know." And he said, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know what to say to the bloke. I wasn't going to say to him. I was a bit shocked, you know. But I tried to say, "Look, Graham, you know," I said, "There's a lot of Australians that not only like you, they love you, and they think that you're the greatest thing that ever lived. And you're so well respected over there." And his response to me was, "Well, you're the only effing Australian that ever said that to me." Yeah. I said, "Okay, well, why did I expect anything different? What the hell was I thinking?" You know. So, but anyway, they looked after him, and I'm so appreciative of that, because I always felt that Castius, or Crackers, there's a couple of nicknames there, was the sort of guy, after what he achieved, that he should have ended up on a winery in the south of France, going through the brochure saying, "Oh, I'll go to this historic meeting, or I won't go to that." Money was never an issue, and what happened was totally different to that, which was very sad.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, look, he was another Frank Matich in the context of building his own cars. You know, remember that year he came to the Tasman Series with the car with the clear bodywork around the cockpit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Most unusual. Yeah. So that he wanted people to be able to see what he was doing inside the car.
Well, I can tell you, back to when I'm in his room that night, we got talking about things, and I'd only met him maybe once or twice since he and I stopped racing together. Anyway, I said, "Graham," I said, "I've got a question for you." I said, "I want to know what you knew at Levin that none of us knew." And I'd had that discussion with everybody, including my lawyer, a number of times. Everybody had a blank, nothing. And he looked at me and he said, "Warwick," he said, I'll answer a question if you answer a question." I said, "Go far away." And he said, this is the sort of memory he had, "Was that you and Malloy leaning over the earth embankment watching me run at Levin?" I said, "Yeah, it was." He was driving the car and he noticed two blokes, and and it was a Thursday, somebody that nobody else was there, So anyway, it obviously something stuck, and I should embellish that a little bit. It got to the point later on in life, poor old Graham got into trouble because he had he tried to shoot a journo, believe it or not, with a bow and arrow, and he had a hit list. Apparently, they went back to his house and found a hit list. And Glenn Abbey rang me from California and said, "Warwick, I need to get hold of Malloy." I said, "I can give you his details." And he said, "Have you heard the news?" I said, "What news?" He said, "Well, Graham tried to, been arrested and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Oh, gee, that's terrible. I can't believe that." And all I can think of being, I said, "Glenn," I said, "was I on the list?" And he said, no. He said, "But Malloy was, and Glenn was." And so I just wanted to let him know, So that's fine. So anyway, then I said, "Well, okay, I've answered your question. Now, what about mine?" And he was a very smart man, and he looked at me and he said, smiled, and he said, "Well, the answer is 4-wheel steering." Good, okay. I walked out and I went, "What the hell, 4-wheel steering? What's he mean by that?" Well, if you think about it, and Malloy couldn't come up with the answer too, by the way, because I had it out with him. In 1973, Rookie of the Year in Indy, what do they do at Indy? They go down the main straight and they turn left, and they go up short straight and they turn left again. They go up the back straight, turn left. In other words, it's 4 left-hand corners, right? So what do the Indy cars do? They run stagger. They run more pressure in the outside rear tyre, makes the car turn good to the left, not very good turning to the right. What did we have at Levin? We had about 5 or 6 left-hand corners and 1 right-hand corner. So he was prepared to sacrifice a little bit for the right and make it all up and the rest. And he was just, And I think to have that, that foresight back then.
Yeah, very, very early, because he was only a young guy. He was only in his early 20s at that point.
Yeah, he was. No, well, I was about 20. Well, when we were racing together, I started when I was 19. I was racing 5,000s when I was about 21, 22, and I was in, the Lola's things, 23. So he was a bit older than me. I'd say he would have been
25.
I'd say 28.
Oh, that much.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I was a lot younger. I was so young at, and by the time I went to America, I'd been racing long enough. People thought I was a bit of an old timer, and I remember BJ Swanson, who became a friend of mine. He got killed in a lull. I ended up with his driver the following year. But BJ, he was. They used to say, "Oh, this young BJ," and I'm saying, "Well, I'm younger than him." but he didn't have. I had some experience. I had about my 3rd, 4th year in 5,000. He was having his first year. And one of the things that I used to get to him about, I say, mate, you're having things happen to you can't explain after you're getting yourself in situations that you can't comprehend. And I said, what you need to do is and this is basically me repeating the Malloy mantra, you've got to just calm down a bit. And I said, he said, well, I told him my story, Malloy. I said, this guy got hold of me, and I said, he calmed me down and made me think. And all of a sudden I'm trying about probably 90% of what I used to, and I'm a second and a half faster. And it's so easy. I think, I don't know, if only I'd known this back then. So I did, and I remember having that conversation with him on that weekend. It was at Mid-Ohio. There was Brian and Mario, I think, on the front, and BJ, myself, on the next thing. And I was on the good side where the racing line on the inside was all the marbles. And I felt him coming under me, and I thought, this is not going to work. And it didn't, and he lost it, went into an armco. The armco split and virtually decapitated him. Oh, God. And he actually had signed a contract, would you believe, with Penske. And he just needed to calm down a bit. He needed a Malloy in his life, and he'd be with us today.
Yeah, well, talking about being with us today, right. We were talking about 4 races in New Zealand, 1973. Mm. Let's move on to Surfers Paradise. Now, you and I have let's say we have a thing, because I saw the accident happened. I was actually at the accident site because I was the only photographer at that point.
You should have run out and stopped me.
Well, you were going under that bridge at a fair old clip, I must confess. So without sort of trying to embellish the thing, let's start with 2 practice laps, and you tell the story.
Well, I'm telling the story about the accident now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the accident actually occurred on the 4th of February 1973 at about 2:30 in the afternoon. Not that I keep track, right?
Of course not.
Okay.
Just mere details.
Yeah. It was the warm-up lap, and I was right up the front. I think first or second lap probably. And it was the first time. I used to actually go under their flat chat then, and I did after that accident, which I'm quite proud of. I believe I'm the first guy ever, and one of the few to ever go under Dunlop Bridge flat out. And anyway, what happened is on the second warm-up lap, we had 2 warm-up laps in those days, I just turned to go under the bridge, and it just went straight ahead. And I missed there was a wooden abutment under the bridge there, and I missed it by centimetres,
I know, I was standing.
Oh, okay. And in hindsight, it would have been nice if I'd hit it, because I think if I hit it, it might have flung me back into the centre of the circuit. But I missed it. So then then they just had a grass verge and then a big earth embankment where they had all the trucks and support,
like an access through the gap
to the pit.
Because the front left hand tyre went down, didn't it?
Did, yeah.
Yeah.
So she went straight ahead. And I was a passenger from that point, and I thought I was maybe going to have a bit of luck. That wasn't going to end up too bad, because I was on this earth embankment, and that was starting to, peel the car down away from, until I got to this cutting, and of course I hit that at the other end, front first, and the vehicle went, the Lola went, I think it was 120 feet until it touched. Well, it didn't go straight up; it went along until it touched the ground again, and I ended up upside down in a drain. Now, the miracle of that was that the drain, I'd say for 9 years and say 6 months of the previous 10 years, if I'd have done that, I would have ended up drowning, because the drain would have had 3 or 4 foot of water in it. I was upside down in the drain. Work it out. The other miracle was, of course, that there was been a drought on and there was no water, but the damn thing didn't catch fire. And I had 28 gallons of avgas in the tanks, and and the only reason I could put that to it was so full of fuel, and the fuel tanks burst so much that the fuel rushed out. In other words, didn't get a chance to vaporise. If it had vaporised, it would have gone. So Susie tells me my God was looking after me, which somebody was, and so I broke both my legs. I snapped both legs off. Just they were at right angles to my thing, about halfway between the knee and the foot. I broke every bone in both ankles. 9 of my 10 toes were gone. I don't know which one's not today. And I broke my back. And that was a bit of a blessing in a way. But the water pump came through the seat in the back and ground a nice little hole in my back. And I missed out on being a paraplegic by maybe half an inch. and a quadriplegic by a little less, maybe a fraction more than that. So I ended up in hospital for 3 months out of that. End up down here in Sydney. In fact, I'm trying to find the guy that operated me was Sydney's eminent orthopaedic surgeon, a guy called Barry Bracken. In those days, they were called Mr. If you called Mr., that was better than almost a Sir, and he looked after me. And it was interesting because I was in there and, I was being operated about every 10 days. I call it having a wheel alignment. They used to give me a wheel alignment, and I used to light up like a Christmas tree after that. And I was surrounded by lots of friends that were, trying to encourage me and stuff, including a police mate of mine who, fortunately, is dead now, Ronnie Daly, and he was one of the guys that walked in and caught me at a real bad moment. He didn't feel sorry for me. In fact, he got right up me. He said, he said, you've done this. He said, you're not, nobody made you do it. You knew the risks. I said, yeah. And he said, well, stop feeling sorry for yourself. So one of the things that did to me once I got over that was I used to almost daily jump in my wheelchair, which I used to be able to do pirouettes on and do all sorts of things. I could make the thing talk, and go down and visit the boys in the paraplegic ward, quadriplegic ward. And I've got to tell you, I've never met such a bunch of positive SOBs in my life. They'd never trouble in the world, and they were never going to walk again. Yeah. And here I was going to walk again somewhere down the road. And so I realised I got nothing to feel sorry about. So the only thing I'm a bit disgusted with myself about is that after I left that hospital, I swore I'd always go back and see them. And you know what? I'd never been back. I just couldn't do it. Yeah. I wished I had, but it's just one of those things.
I understand. I had similar circumstances myself. Right. So that was, how many months were you in recuperation? Quite a few.
Yeah. I had stilts and all sorts of things, and it took me, I actually jumped into a race car in September, which was the McLaren. That was down at Sandown.
Yes. I like this story.
See, it was 6 months later. But what was strange was that about 3 months, just after I got out of hospital, Barry, I was desperate to go home. I needed to go home. And so he came into me, he said, it's such and such a holiday, so I'm going away. And he said, if you do anything stupid, bend anything, break anything, he said, I'm not coming back. He said, you'll just have to wait. And I said, no. So he gave me I remember it was the first time I ever saw my legs. He pulled the plaster, had the plaster off because they did the wheel alignment thing I told you about. And my thumb was about as wide as my leg, and I looked at it, oh, gee, this is terrible. I'll never walk again. Look at the thing. It's nothing. And he said, no, and he's in there flexing my bones, and he said, oh, this is quite good. I said, oh, I'm glad you're happy. So anyway, what happened, what turned out to happen, he rang me a few weeks later, and he said, what hadn't happened in ever how 3 months or something. He said, you've got such massive breaks in there. He said, your body's just taking a lot longer to build up what needs to be built up. And he said, but we have this new thing we're trying, and we've done it on animals, but never done a human yet. I said, well, tell me about that. He said, well, we put a battery in your leg and we connect up an electrode either side of the brake. And he said, what doesn't happen over X will happen pretty quickly. I said, okay, well, let's give it a shot. So in for another operation, bang, bang. Anyway, what didn't happen for 3 months happened in about 3 weeks. All of a sudden, my legs all, going, I'm starting to get around. And to the point that I was then supposed to go back and have the battery taken out, which I didn't, of course. I went off, like a year later, I went off to America, still had a battery in there. And I ended up getting a telex in those days. I didn't have faxes or even, definitely had no emails. And from Dr. Bracken saying, Warwick, you've got to go and have this battery taken out because we've had a few of them blow up and causing gangrene, all sorts of things. So, and I used to carry my x-rays with me to show anybody if anything had happened. And so I went to see a local orthopedic man there in Los Angeles. I think back in those days it cost me $500, which I thought was a fortune in 1974. And what it was, late 73, 4. And I showed him the x-ray and he said, it's fantastic. I said, well, when are you going to take it out? He said, I'm not touching it. I said, well, I've just spent $500 to tell me not touching it. Okay. He said, no. He said, I'm not taking anything about it. He said, you need to get the bloke to put it in there, take it out. I said, all right. So I went back to Australia, and the next race I did was the 1974 Australian Grand Prix at Oran Park, and I'm as hot as a pistol. I'm on pole, and I'm set the lap record. The lap record I set there lasted for 9 years and 10 months. I thought 10 years had a good ring about it. 9 years and 10 months. So the deal I did with Barry because I had to go back to America, would you believe, on the following Tuesday, is I'd turn up at 6 a.m. on Monday morning to the hospital, nothing to eat, nothing to drink, and he'd take the battery out, which is exactly what he did. And then I jumped on the Pan Am thing and was back in America on the following Tuesday night.
Now, I want to go back a little bit. Go back to that Sandown race meeting, because there's the story about you driving the McLaren, the M10, the old car, as a demonstration exercise with a few other guys.
Yeah.
And something happened to you that kind of lit you up a little.
Oh, one of my mechanics was Lugsy then.
Graham Adams.
Oh, I think of him every day, God bless him. Him and Malloy, they used to fight like Kilkenny cats. In fact, Malloy fired him half a dozen times and said, this is getting embarrassing. I can't keep firing him. But Lugsy was not only a friend, he was a really good mechanic, a very competent mechanic. And I trusted him, and, you know, it's good to have somebody that, you know, he cares about your life, you know. And so I went down, as you correctly said, it was a demonstration, and there was 6 of us or something. There was Johnny McCormack, and I think Gary Cooper was there, and a few. And it was just a demo thing, so no big deal. So I jumped in the McLaren, and off I went. Anyway, the very first time that we went hard in, or it wasn't even real hard, but with a bit of ferocity into, what was the corner after into Pitt Straight?
Shell Corner or Peters?
Peters, went in there. They braked a bit earlier, and I had to get on the picks. So I got on the picks, and I felt a snap in my right ankle. And I've broken something again. Pain was unbelievable. Anyway, I missed running up Gary's backside by inches. And I thought, my God, this is unbelievable. So I got back, and we're all in front of the grandstand there at Sandown, never how many people are in there. And Lugsy's there, blah, 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 blah. And I said to him, mate, you got to lift me out of the car. I can't put any weight on my right foot. So I busted my leg again. And anyway, so he played the game, what have you. And as soon as I said, mate, you've got to get me out of here. I've got to go to the hospital. So I ended up going back to Sydney, and I ended up in going to see Barry Bracken again. And Barry had a look at me, and he did some tests and stuff. He said, son, you're really lucky. I said, why? I don't feel too lucky. I said, I busted something. No, he said, you haven't busted anything. And he said, what you've done, he said, all those tendons when we were playing around doing all these operations in your foot have all coalesced together.
So like fused together.
Correct. And he said, if you hadn't done, what you've done is released them all. I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, if you hadn't done that, he said, you would have been here, have another operation, and we would have had to do it. And he said, you would have been another 6 months at least, you know. So, you know, it was one of those, because something good that came out of something bad, but Lugsy saved the day, because I remember all the press were there, you know, and the cameras, and I had to pretend like, oh, it was really fun. I really enjoyed that. And I was in absolute agony.
You're screaming with pain,
yeah.
But with a smile on your face. So, 1975, probably the most interesting year. You are the only Australian to have ever won the Tasman Series.
Yeah.
And 1975 was the year that you did it.
Yeah. And
that was that probably your most successful series of all time anywhere?
It feels like it. Statistically, it wasn't. I only won 2 of the 8 races. But I share that with some pretty, you know, famous names: Jimmy Clark, Jackie Stewart, Graham McRae, Graham Lawrence, so on. I think the tragedy now, we're 50 years away from it, is that there was 8 guys that won those 12 races. There's 3 of us left today. Yes. Yeah, Jackie, myself, and Graham Lawrence.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, so it was unbelievable. I suppose the most interesting part, I won the Oran Park round, which was the first race I won after that Grand Prix that I lost. I don't know if I told you how I lost it. 13 laps to go, and the harmonic balancer shattered and split the brake lines apart, and I didn't end up in the fence. I suppose that's the only good thing. But I wasn't happy. Oh, Jesus, you know. Because, you know, you always think to yourself, look, you know, I had the Australian Grand Prix, it was there.
Yes.
And I lost it.
You had it in your hands.
I just had to stay awake. I mean, 13 laps, I mean, God's sake. Yeah. And I found myself, and now I haven't got it. And what happens if I never get another shot at it? And that was and that haunted me a bit. But Malloy was unbelievable. You know, I mean, just those things happen. I had a pretty good run. But what was so interesting, about 4 weeks before that, we were at Auckland at Pukekohe and the New Zealand Grand Prix, and we stayed at a place called Castle's Motel, which was right opposite where we worked on the cars, which Tim Bailey's Ferrari concessionaire it was, and Tim was a lovely man. And you virtually had to know us to get in there, and we were having our Saturday night meal, whatever. Pat was holding court there, and we're in there anyway. Malloy, I obviously didn't have a drink, I was racing, but Malloy didn't mind having a beer or two, and so we got out of the bed, and he started having a shot at me. And one of the things he said to me, well, he said, I was second on the grid. Cassius was pole, I was second. He said, Warwick, he said, you didn't try hard today. Now, I could accept all such, you're a dumb schmuck and you haven't got a brain in your head and all that, but trying hard was not in the vocabulary. You never accused me of that. So anyway, we got at it, and poor old Pat was beside himself because his whole team, he said, my whole team, we're front running Tasman car, and now the team, they all want to kill each other. So we virtually cleared the place, and I said, Malloy and I finished our words with each other. The next day we went out. Cassius led in the first corner. I got in going up into the chicane, and I won that race by over a lap. And it was virtually wet the whole time. If it had been dry, or if it had dried earlier than it did, I wouldn't have finished because my tyres wouldn't have done another 2 laps. Wouldn't have done 1 lap. So anyway, I've just won the New Zealand Grand Prix, whoopee. And so I get in there and go through all the formalities, and I thanked John Price from BP and Pat Burke and Target and my mother for having me, and never mentioned Malloy's name. So we had a bit of a frosty period for 3 or 4 days after that, and made up, and we won the Tasman Series about 6 weeks later.
Yeah. A little bit before that, there was that situation where you wanted to go to America for the USAC Formula 5000 series. Malloy was kind of, again, pivotal in there, that he was the one who convinced Pat that she should go in the first place.
Correct.
So you went over there, you drove in several races, but tell us all about just basically almost being like what's the right way? Like a gypsy in a van driving between racetracks. It's kind of like the 60s all over again.
Yeah, well, they knew I was a kid that won the Tasman Series, from Australia, BFD. Wouldn't have a clue anything else. The first race meeting was at Ontario Motor Speedway, and Mario Andretti was the king in those days. Brian was, and the guy Tony, what's his name, runs ex-Formula 1 boss, Tony Southgate. No, he was a designer. Anyway, there was some pretty good steerers there, and then little Warwick, first session, qualifies third. So that got, so next thing, and we had Firestone tyres, I remember, in those days. And Firestone came to me and said, son, would you like some of Mario's special tyres? So I love some of those. So they gave me a set of his tyres for the race. Malloy will tell you to this day, if he was here, they nobbled me, but they knew they wouldn't make it, and they didn't. The tyres blistered. But you know what? Next, obviously, we weren't very happy with Firestone then, but Goodyear approached me, and I never after that ever had to drive. I was a Goodyear driver. Nobody ever paid for a set of tyres. I'd walk into their shop and get 12 sets of tyres to take to Australia for New Zealand for the Tasman. But it was a great time. We did 3 races, a very short period. The last race was at Riverside, California, and great circuit, really fast, fantastic, great history. And Mario won it, guess what? And Brian was second, I was third. And so I came home from that. That's when I came home and won the Tasman, and in February, a few months later on. And but I knew then that I could run with anybody. I just had to, keep sensible, listen to, try and keep my brain in gear and not let my heart overrule anything, and go racing. But I was then a year and a bit out from my accident. Yeah. Until I had my first accident, I was going to be a Formula 1 world champion. Wasn't a matter of if, it only a matter of when. That was a bit sobering, and I thought, okay, well, it's a bit of a dose of reality. So from that point on, I decided that instead of going to Europe to do the Formula 1 thing, I'll go to we'll go to the States and just try and make some money. And we did. We had a great time, very successful. And yeah, apart from winning the World Championship, which wasn't a reality after that, the best thing I ever did.
See, you went to the States and you did a deal with Jack McCormack to drive a Talon.
Yeah.
Was that a success?
Well, no. Wasn't. You don't win. There's only one bloke that's successful. It's the guy that wins. The rest of them are all unsuccessful to a varying degree. But the car, oh God, Jack was funny, Ben. We used to joke about Jack. If you can't trust Jack, who can you trust? And he and his brother Dennis ended up running Indy cars very successfully. Jack, the car was magnificent, but the car was a McRae. It was a commercialised McRae. Talon. It was, and they're building them for customers. So I was in the Works Talon, which is a McRae. And my teammate, believe it or not, was Christy Oman. Wonderful man. Fantastic driver. Another guy with a personality. I could never understand how he did what he did. And he really was the man responsible. He's the guy. He was the Williams driver and that I replaced at Watkins Glen, because he had an accident, a road accident, and broke his toes, so he couldn't race. So he rang up Frank and said, "I've got just a guy for you," bang, 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 and the rest is history. But so, yeah, the whole thing, we came back to Australia and we won the Tasman. And after that, what are we going to do now? We'll go back to America where the money is and start running for money, and that's what we did. And then I ended up with the Bob Bay drive in 76, which was the drive that the BJ Swanson that I referred to earlier, who got killed. And that was a disaster because poor old Bob had a few personal problems. He was an alcoholic and stuff, and he ran out of money halfway through the year. So I ended up in a lawsuit with him. And here's a little boy from Australia in a top suite of some rich law firm in Culver City, and it would never happen to me in Australia. And they're saying, "We'll do this and we'll do that, and we're going to sue him for $1 million." I said, "He owes me whatever it was then." Well, I thought it was a lot of money. He owed me 50 or 70 grand or something. And I said, "I don't want $1 million. I just want me 50, 70 grand back." And he said, "No, you don't do that over here." I said, "Okay." So I did what I was told, handed over a check, another 30 grand so I'm now at 100 grand in the hole. And next thing, 3 months later, I get a blue for $1 million from Bob Bay to me. So I rang the lawyer and said, "Oh, no, don't worry about it, son." He said, "This is how it's done over here." I said, "Oh, okay." So, in Australia, I would have known enough people to go to and say, "Look, don't
even bother trying.
Don't get caught up in those crap." Yeah. So that was that. So
moving on from there, the Bob Bay thing didn't work. You teamed up then with Rudy van der Straten with the VDS team.
Yeah, I started off. You had two drivers, Teddy Paulette,
who came out here.
Yeah, great
for the Tasman.
Yeah, wonderful driver, Teddy.
Tiny little fella.
Yeah, tiny little bloke. Real character, real tough little, like a little fighter. And Gethin, Peter Gethin, was a great bloke. Gethin won, I think, still the closest ever Formula One race at Monza. And of course, the trick with Monza apparently is that it's a kiss of death if you go on the last lap first. You're going to get monstered. And he won. I think he went in third and won it by hundredth of a second.
Sounds like most Formula V races.
Yeah,
you can be fifth on the last lap and come first.
Yeah. You'd almost pull over and put the stop sign out to say, "Please go and let me go into the last lap, not first." Gethin was a beaut bloke. I got on very well, both of them. Anyway, I got they had interesting mix. They had a Lola 400 and a Chevron, and back in the back of the truck they had the 430, which was basically the Lola Formula 2 car with a 5,000 engine plugged in. And I remember it was a Moran, made in Switzerland, Moran, M-O-R-A-N engine. And compared to Peter Malloy's engines, it was just hopeless, I thought. But it had all this real fancy sliding, not butterfly valves for the inlets, on roller bearings and all sorts of weird stuff. Very expensive. Anyway, I made such an impression on it that poor old Teddy didn't get invited back. And from then on, it was myself and Gethin. And then they put a good engine in it, a Chaparral engine, and I was off to the races, as they say.
So that was the period you were running up against guys like Bobby Unser, Dan Gurney, Mario Andretti, of course. You're mixing it with the real heavyweights in America. These are guys that were in and out of Formula One. Of course, Andretti won the Formula One World Championship. Dan Gurney had been around for decades by this stage of the game.
Yeah, like Dan, lovely man.
Yeah. So was it a pleasant situation? I mean, did you get along well with the guys?
I tried to. It was a bit different in those days. Like today, they don't talk to each other because they think they're going to give something up. We could talk to each other and then get in and want to kill each other in a race car. The only guy I really had any trouble with was Bobby Unser. And I was at Mossport, Canada, and I came out of the bottom up the straight, had a few kinks in it, but there was a lot of Armco fences everywhere. And even then we knew they weren't good things to hit. So,
nothing stationary that's a part of the scenery is a good thing to hit.
Only on television. They're good to hit on TV. But so I came up Main Straight and Bobby was on the sort of left side of the track, and which was the good side. That's where the racing line, the marbles were on my side. And I found myself, he kept pushing me over, and I found myself with my front wheels behind his front wheels which wasn't a good thing. Because what happens
interlocking.
Because one of the things you do learn is how to hit people. You can't talk about this, and we deny everything in front of the stewards, but I knew how to hit somebody and me stay on the ground and them not. So Bobby, definitely, he just he didn't know who I was. It doesn't matter who I was. But he wouldn't have tried the same thing on Mario or with Brian. And he had me rubbing the fence with my right front and rubbing his chassis with my left front. I didn't give an inch of a scream. So I didn't launch him, but he ended up second worst out. And I had great pleasure pulling in the pits a lap later, watching him get out of the car, tearing strips off. Poor old Dan Gurney saying, "Who's this effing what have you?" And it was me. Oh, great. So I didn't care who you were. Even Andretti, and I always had respect for them, and they were nice people, and they were people who deserve respect. But I was just a young guy that I pulled my pants on one at a time like anybody else, and I was prepared to fight, kill and die if I had to protect my patch. And unless you're prepared to do more, you're not going to get the better of me. So that's where we had. And but we knew, because of these cars had terrible accidents, and you usually, as I often but talk about, if we had a bad day, we'd go to the morgue.
Yes.
We knew that.
Yeah.
If we had a good day, well, we might go to hospital. I had a few bad days, but luckily I didn't get to the morgue. But I was, I was single, totally focused. That's all. My life was. If I died, my attitude in those days, if I died in a race car, well, that's the price I had to pay.
That was the destiny.
Silly, and I mean, I don't feel that way now.
So we move on a little bit. 1977, you came back with the VDS team for the Rothman Series, what became the Rothman Series, which was the old Tasman.
Yeah.
You won the Australian Grand Prix at Oran Park after AJ Alan Jones launched himself just a little early.
Yeah, about 10 seconds early. I couldn't believe it. I nearly went with him. I came that close. And then he launched himself, and he went about 100 metres down the road and stopped, and they still hadn't dropped the flag. And then thought, well, screw it, I'm going to cop a penalty, I might as well go. So he went. And he actually ended up turning into the left-hander down there at the end of the straight before I left the grid. So then we try and be a bit cerebral about it. He's going to cop a minute. And the crew told me on the board he got the minute's penalty. So I had to beat him by at least 59 seconds. But have him not catch me by more than 59 seconds. Yeah. And in the first bit of the race, I pulled him in a little bit, and then I thought, well, am I being real smart here or what, And then I had a little scenario happens, which was not uncommon, is that because we were running everything right on the ragged edge. And one of the problems that those Chevys used to have, they used to break inner valve springs. It wouldn't stop you, but it would make the engine go furry. We used to rev them to about 8,500 RPM. And if you break a valve spring, the thing just didn't feel strong from about 8 on. You could still do a pretty competitive lap time, but just didn't have that edge to it. So I reckon about halfway through the race, I had broken a valve spring or two. And I just decided, okay, well, I'll just watch the clock now. And I think he finished 5th, I think. I won it. And he went on to win a Grand Prix, a Calder. I think I was there.
1980.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, he definitely had a bad day. I don't know if I ever got an answer. I think I might have asked him, but I should ask him again, why did he do it? I don't know. It's one of those things you look at you and say, I haven't got a clue. I mean, why? Having said that, up until then in those days, I'd beaten Alan a few times. He'd beaten me a few times. There wasn't a lot in it. The year or two later after that, or the next year, 78, we're moving on when Can-Am cars now, which are nothing more than 5,000s with bodies on them. They were actually the bodies were a little heavier than the 5,000, so they were a little slower around the slow corner, but they had a lot more aero, and they were quicker and faster. So overall, lap times, 6 to 1, half a dozen the other. But during the 1978 Can-Am Series, there were 3 Australians in it. There was Alan, Elliot Forbes-Robinson and myself, and I think they had, say, a dozen races in the series. I think between the Aussies we won 12 races 10 races of the 12. And the Yanks,
that's a pretty good
result. The Yanks were beside themselves. And they used to say, like, you goddamn Australians, come here, take all their money. And I used to say, look, what are you talking about? We could be some nasty people from somewhere. We're nice guys. You should be appreciative. So anyhow, that was that. But Alan was good. Alan, we raced a lot together. Alan was not as good in the 5,000 as, say,
Brian Redman.
Yeah, definitely Brian, maybe Mario. But we're talking infinitesimal little nothings here,
Puff venture.
That's it. That's been nice about it, But Alan, in 78, Alan won 5 races and I won 1. But I got second in every other race to him. And, we went down the last race there at Riverside again, which is where I had that good result a year or two before with Brian and with Mario and Brian. And again, Alan was on front and I was second. So on qualifying, and then went into the first corner, and they had 6 corners, really, really tight. Not tight fast, but if you're inch off line going in, you'd be 10 feet off coming out. So anyway, I was one of those occasions, like I referred to earlier, with Frank. I knew that Alan was trying hard and he wanted to try, and I thought I was going to win that race. And it was the first race I had a blue with the old man over it because we all had spare cars, and the old man decided to put Jeff Lees in the second car. Well, what happened to me is I went down into turn 6 and went for the anchors, and they went to the floor. So I spun the car, missed everything, and I finished second. And I always contended that if he'd had all the mechanics on my car, maybe they would have picked up. But it split an O-ring in the master cylinder.
Just something. Yeah. The Dick Johnson line, the 10-second part that stops the race car.
Yeah. But always what if, but you shouldn't play what if. And so Alan was a very worthy champion. And but I think in other years, I took Alan Jones to beat me, put it that way.
Yeah.
And I think I would have ever who they'd put up against me. Alan Jones drove for the Carl Haas team, which was a works team, and their engine builder was Chaparral, which is I can't think of the guy's name. Wonderful man, Chaparral. Jim Hall. Jim Hall. I've actually done a lot of sort of Monday morning quarterbacking over this and I've done it with Steve Horn, who was a Kiwi, who was my team manager with VDS. And I'm not sure if he agrees with me or not, but I think there's something to this. I mean, all of us, the top cars, we had all the money in the world. We never wanted for anything. I had a complete spare car. I was always sitting there, ready to go, the whole thing. As Alan had and as Elliot, everybody did. But I think the difference was, I'm going to give you an example, but we went to, we were the first people ever, I think, in about 1978 that came up with water-injected brakes. The boys were brilliant. They didn't, they were mechanics and engineers. They weren't, technically trained and stuff. But what they came up with is we fitted an injector, 120-pound PSI injector, which normally spurts fuel into the chambers, and we put that one of those on each of the ducts into the brakes, and we had a pump. 120 PSI pump that was on a switch so that when we put our foot on the brake, it'd spray the water. Brilliant. We went to a circuit in Indianapolis. It wasn't Indianapolis Speedway, it was another place, to test this. And my instructions were that I had to go out, set it on about 7,000 in third gear, 120, 30 mile an hour, and and we had a gauge and press on it until it got to 80 psi, which I did. And then we would record how long it took for the brakes to fade with the system working and with it not. Well, the answer was with it not, it lasted about 1 minute and 30 seconds. And with it, 4 minutes, we were still at brakes. Wow, we've gone to something. We only ever use it during the race because you can't, secrets don't stay that for long. And because the practice you didn't need, because practice, what do? You go out, you do 4 or 5 laps, you come in. So you didn't, but for the race you did. And the first time we actually tried an angle was a little place called Trois-Rivières, Three Rivers in Quebec, Canada. And I was leading that race like you wouldn't believe, like another Big Mac and a fries day I could have. And the tank that held the water split, all the water went out of it. And so that was that.
You were back to scratch with everybody else.
Yeah, but what I was referring to was the amount of testing and that goes on behind the scenes. Chaparral owned a circuit called Rattlesnake Raceway in Texas, and it's where the General Motors paid for it all. And the other thing that probably is not widely known is that the guy that built the engines, Chaparral engines, was a guy called Francois, and he was not only was he a great engine builder, but he was a brilliant test driver. So did old Brian's going back to England between each races and what have you. And what they'd do, they were talking to the factory and they'd say have a new rear A-arm or something to fit to the car. So they'd fabricate it, put it on the car. Brian would get in the car. They didn't need a trailer. They drove across the road on the circuit. And it had all the telemetry to it so they could record time-wise on video or whatever what they had in those days of what speed they were doing at all times. So they knew they had a base to look at. And I'm sure that they did a lot of that. And we had the money to do it, but we just didn't think of it. And I often said, Steve, if we'd have engaged in some of that, maybe we wouldn't have got beaten by Allen that year. Well, that's my excuse. Well, it's not an excuse, but I think about it a bit because we didn't do any of it.
You mentioned earlier in 77 with the Formula 5000 chassis with sports car bodies on them. You had some experience at Saint-Jevot in Canada.
Saint-Jevot, that was the first round of the series that year, and that's the series that Brian Redman nearly turned into a paraplegic. Yeah, he flipped the car, Elliot did, and one other I can't recall. And mine was the next weekend, or the weekend after, I forget which now, at Laguna Seca, and I flipped the car, going over the start-finish line at Laguna, which I'd been over 100 times before, in a 5000, flat to the boards, not a problem. And it's after that Lola then said to us, we think we may have a problem. Well, we'd asked them after the first two things, because it's only going to happen firstly to the couple of guys that are capable of getting the car within that last, half of 1%. Right. And of course, if it's all flat, well, nothing's going to happen. And what had happened, you go over a hill and there was a certain point where the airflow would just turn negative and the car would suddenly go. And it wasn't a gradual thing like it to get light. You had it was all gone. And
it's basically turning vertical.
Oh, well, yeah.
Just ballistic.
Yeah. Well, I ended up probably 45 degrees. The road had a bit of a left-hand turn in it, and I ended up in the right bank, bounced off the bank in the middle of the road, nothing but dust. And as I said, the guy, I think Townsend was his name, came over the hill, went eeny, meeny, miny, mo, went for the right side and hit me fair midship. He ended up in hospital, I ended up in hospital. And then, funny enough, about an hour before, a young guy I wished I could think of his name, in a Lola, 2-litre Lola, ran off the road at that next corner and killed himself.
Yeah, but for the grace of God, they say.
That's right.
Yeah,
and I'm sitting there in hospital thinking, God, I was going probably 30 mile an hour faster than this kid. Yeah. He's dead and I'm still here and I've got a broken foot. Yeah. So how lucky am I?
Absolutely. You ran in Formula One just the once. Yeah. Now, just give us the potted version of that.
Oh, what can I say? It's the worst weekend I've ever had in motor racing without getting hurt. Car was a disaster. I think I mentioned before that I promised myself if I ever got asked the question, would I do it unless I thought the car was a decent car? And so I changed my mind in 10th of a second, said, yes, I'll do it. Chris Amon asked me to do it. Chris couldn't get the car to work. So, I had a teammate, Arturo Manzario, little Italian fellow, lovely. He won Le Mans, I believe. He was interesting. Anyway, I qualified like at 25 or 22nd or something. I had qualified him, And I got 14th in the race, and I outran him. And although he didn't finish, but when he was on the road, I was in front of him. So I did beat my teammate. That's all I can say. It was a disaster. I had no faith in the car, the mechanics, or anything.
Just one of those things that you said. You made a decision on the spur of the moment to do it, and pretty much regretted it from the day, almost from that moment onwards.
Yeah, I made an emotional decision that I could overcome this. Well, of course, that's using your head, your heart, not your head.
Yeah, understood. So, pretty much by the time you get to 1976, you are pretty much getting towards the end of your racing car career.
Yes, I had my last race in February '79. Yeah.
Yeah.
But and the reason was I was married then. No, sorry, I got married in '78. I had a daughter, and I knew I obviously had a couple of decent accidents that should have finished me, except for a bit of luck. And I've always felt in anything in life, it's always good to know when to stop to do something. And I blew with the old man over the Jeff Lee's thing, and I said he shouldn't have done that. And once you have a blue with the old man, it puts a wedge between us, and things were never the same. So I came back. I did the Tasman Series with him, which I finished third in, I think, and I won the last race. So I won my last professional race. But I went back. I had offers, but it wasn't on the same money I was used to.
So whereabouts were you living at that stage in the States?
I was living in California, and it's where I met my first wife. And what can I say? I used to every second weekend I was
off at a racetrack.
Yeah, off at a race. I always used to end up. I couldn't believe it at 3:00 in the morning in Chicago's O'Hare Airport.
On the way back from somewhere.
Or on the way there, on the way back, and something. And I think, God, I used to look around. What's a little Aussie boy doing here? I do remember on one occasion, this will tell you how stupid you can be. On one occasion, I got there, it must have been the middle of winter, and I had 5 hours before the next flight, so I went and got a motel room and had a bit of a kip, But I made the mistake of, I had a shower, nice hot shower, and then go out to meet the next flight. And I walked out of the motel, which was at the airport. You walk out of the motel, cross into the lounge, and you're at the aeroplane. And my ears nearly snapped off because it was snowing. And I'd never been an Aussie boy, I never thought about that. And I thought, my God, what have I done? It was painful. And I thought, well, no local would do this, because I knew all the nuances in Australia, but not, Chicago. I didn't think of that.
Don't you worry. I mean, I left Australia on New Year's Day once, and it was about 38 degrees, and I got off the plane in Detroit, and it was minus 20. So I know the feeling, don't worry.
But I felt so stupid on that. Gee,
So basically, your career up until that point was exclusively in racing cars.
Yeah.
As the old gag goes, racing cars don't have doors, okay, or mudguards.
Or a taximeter.
You came back to Australia, and your first proper touring car drive, was it the first ever touring car drive that you drove one of Dick Johnson's Falcons at Bathurst in 1976? No, 78.
Probably. If it wasn't at first, I can't think much was before that. But I'd become friendly with Brian Burt, who was the sponsor, and he owned the Ford dealership in Brisbane. Just the most charming, delightful man. Tragic story. Brian lost his only son, 17-year-old son, and then died himself of cancer on a Qantas flight coming back from Manila. I mean, talk about, bad luck. But he kept at me. He said, why don't you come and drive one of my cars? So he put me with Johnny French. And John was the neatest bloke. God, I loved him. He was a larrikin. And John was the sort of guy, he'd only do 4 or 5 races a year, but within half an hour he was right up, full toed on. And we were in one car, and Dickie Johnson and Vern were in the other, Vern Shupin.
Oh, those two, the Blue Falcons.
Yeah, well, the cars were identical except for the name on the thing. And I remember in that race, we were about halfway, 60% through the race, and we were running like in the top 6 or 8, we were all right. And it was just an exercise in restraint. We were just doing a time. All the gauges were nice. The oil was good. The hardest thing for me was keeping my mind on the job in terms of not sniffing the hot dogs and looking at the shields going around the top of the mountain, But anyway, apart from that, I had to step myself into a few times. And then I was in the car and we were going up the hill and suddenly, bang, and would you believe a 5-cent shear pin that held the distributor drive sheared off and the ignition went 180, went out of phase, and that was it. Yeah. So, I'm not saying we would have won the thing, but we would have had a hell of a day.
Yeah. Because that was the Dick Johnson line from that era. You know, what 20-cent part are we going to break this year that we've never broken before?
Yeah, there's lots of 20-cent parts in them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's why this whole thing's, even today, is an element of luck. And, you know, I love trying to figure out the human side of it.
Touching back on touring cars for a moment, you did 2 Bathursts, 79 and 80 in Tiranas.
Yeah, Gary Cook, lovely bloke.
As you said a moment ago, try to stay, if you would, focused in a touring car when you're used to going a whole lot faster in a racing car. You've only ever driven touring cars at Bathurst. I mean, Bathurst is the folklore thing about Australian muscle car.
I won a race in a touring car at Tasmania. Wanneroo? No, not Wanneroo, Bathurst. What's the circuit somewhere in Tassie?
Either Simmons Plains or Baskerville. They're the two.
Is you sure there's not another one? Okay, well, no, I won a race in Tassie in one.
Did you?
It was only a 5-lapper thing, you know.
Okay, in a touring car?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
I said, I'm in the wrong game.
But did you enjoy that?
Yes. I had wheels on it. I loved it.
Yeah.
My story's a bit unusual in so much that I never lacked confidence. In fact, I probably had too much. But as a kid, my father was the most dominant man in my life. He died when I was 17. But he was a self-made man, and he gave me all sorts of principles to live by. And I left school. He let me leave school early. I never even got my high school certificate. And it was against his better judgment, but I learnt more in that 2 years from him. I learned things like he'd say to his son, he'd say, you know, everybody's equal. No matter what colour you are, you're all the same thing. You all bleed red and all that. He said, but what makes you more equal than the others is what you do with your life. And he said, what you've got to do is you've got to find something in life that you're good at. Maybe God gave you, if you're religious, God gave you a bit of talent for it. Yeah, good. And then you've got to work your guts out and be the best at it and don't leave anything on the table. So I always knew that from day one. So even when I was in my little Brabham, all it did was prove what I felt in my heart, that I could do this. Mm. You know, and as I got higher and higher, well, it became more realistic, you know. So that I credit that with my old man. Having said that, he was, when I'd come home from being a spectator at Warwick Farm at Creek Corner, or whatever, and I'd wax lyrical about how good it all was, and he'd get up me, you know, and he'd say they're all nuts and da-da-da. Having said that, he was fighting heavyweights at Sydney Stadium when he was 17. But he wasn't happy about that. So anyway, he died at 17. I had my first race 2 years later when I'm 19. And my family went nuts. Like it took them 9 months to realise I was racing. But anyway, and I remember my mother, I had to go out and mow the lawn and clean the pool, and she'd sign a entry form for me. Well, that's all right. She'd sign one and I'd forged 5 or 6 more. And she used to say to me, she said, I don't remember. I said, oh, no, you did. Actually. You sure? Yeah, absolutely sure. No worries. But so anyway, the long and the short of it is the Australian Grand Prix in 1977 was the first race that the rest of my family ever attended.
The first race?
Yeah.
Gosh.
And I was given every inducement you can imagine, you know, we'll buy you best boat the money can buy, a block of flats plus. I said, don't want any of it. I said, they always do the blackmail thing about the old man. What would he say? I said, I know he wouldn't be happy, but what I'm doing is not illegal. It's not immoral. You know, he told me to be good at something. Guess what?
This is what you're good at.
So, but this is the funny part. I won the Grand Prix there. And, you know, after all the celebration, whatever, I walked in at home at about midnight. And my family were all there and what have you, and still having a drink and a celebration and stuff. And I just said to them, I said, look, you know, I said, I know the old man wouldn't have been happy about what I did, but do you think he'd have a smile on his face tonight? And they all said, yeah, I think he would. I can't tell you what a monkey that was off my back. It was a big thing for me.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway, and my hope is, I'm not religious, I'm a little bit spiritual, I suppose, but I do believe that this is not the end of it and we all go somewhere, I suppose. But I'm hopeful if I ever get in the room with him, I'm going to have to keep him behind the iron bars for about half an hour just to calm him down. But after that, we'll have a good old conversation. He'll say, well, son, you did what I told you to do. That's right.
So you mentioned a little while ago that when you decided to retire, it was because you got married, you had a daughter. Do you think you retired just that little bit too soon, or had you had enough? Because you'd been at it for 10 years plus.
Yeah. The answer is yes, I did retire too early. Most people do, but was it the right thing to do? Well, it probably was. It was a very, clinical decision in a way. I mean, I was all about money.
Yeah.
I was doing something I loved and something I thought I was good at, and I was making a lot of money out of it. So when the first time the money ever turned down, I used these, I'm married and children, all the rest of it. Well, Warwick, if you've got half a brain, you'll stop this. And you're still here, and you shouldn't be here. I know that. I'm one of the few people that's walking around the earth today that knows that I should have died on the 4th of February 1973. Absolutely no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I think of like Senna had his accident in 96. Yeah. I watched that. As soon as it happened, I said, gone, forget it. They did what happened to him, the bolt came out of the steering, went into his visor, went through right eye, and he had a stroke. Now, they did an autopsy on him, and there was nothing, there was no broken bones, nothing. So he could have had that accident
100 times over.
Yeah, he got killed once. My accident, I could have had that 100 times. I would have died 99 times.
Yes, exactly. Precisely the opposite.
Yeah.
So, look, there's a second career of yours. Mm. What was it that led you? I mean, okay, we know racing drivers, fighter pilots, all that sort of thing, but you walked away from motor racing, you went back to the States, you learned how to fly. And not only just to learn how to fly, you learned how to fly proper jet aircraft. Mm. And you had an entirely separate career flying around the world.
40 years.
40 years of flying. Mm. That's not a bad result.
No, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I upset my beautiful Susie all the time because I tell her and anybody else that wants to talk about this, or not just this, but with the racing, here I am now, 74 now virtually. I've never worked a day in my life yet. I've just had fun. And I've found a way to make money out of doing stuff I like to do.
Can you bottle that? Can you tell me what the formula is?
Only if I can get the rights for it.
I'll give you 20%.
Because I don't know how, I can't explain to you really, logically, why. Except, it just worked out that way. And I'd always had the belief, so as far as I was concerned, there was never a real risk. Well, there was a risk, but nothing I couldn't handle. And the flying thing, I mean, I didn't enter flying. I entered motor racing. I was very quickly in motor racing, felt that I had a real future. I could go a long way here. How far? Who knows? The flying thing started off as a fun thing, and then just blossomed. And next thing, and 40 years later, I retired with 10,000 hours, and had some great memories. Flew some wonderful people, and because I actually owned I owned a couple of aeroplanes, but I owned a jet in about 1980. 87, 88 to about 1994, and it was the most successful charter-operated jet in Australia. We had the whole Sydney market. If you want to charter a jet out of Sydney, there's probably a 70% chance I'd turn up. And I flew lots of nice people, lots of obviously very wealthy people. And they're just people with a bit of money, and they're still nice, very nice people, most of them. Yeah. Not all, most.
No.
I can tell you one shocking story.
Go on.
Well, our company, we had about 6 jets in our company, but Elton John, when he used to come to Australia, I'm sorry, this isn't actually shocking, it's a good story. Elton John used to come to Australia, and he loved staying at the Gazebo Hotel there at King's Cross. I think it's an apartment complex now. And so what he'd do, he'd charter us, even if he had concerts in Auckland. So we'd sit into Auckland's about 3 hours, back 2.5. So we'd take him in the mid-afternoon over there. He'd do his concert at 7 o'clock, finish at midnight, and we'd have him back in Sydney 2:30 in the morning. And then 3 days later, I'd take him back. So I only flew him once, but on the one time I did fly him, the other boys, everybody briefs everybody else on who they are and what their peccadillos are and all that. And they sent all these hangers on along and had this list a mile long of special food, GE modified and bullshit. Anyway, I just gave it to the girls and, I don't know anything about that. That's your department. So anyway, we get him into Auckland the first time, and he's getting out of the aeroplane, and he's a very polite guy and lovely man. And he said, "Hey boys," he said, "is there a Kentucky Fried Chicken around here?" We said, "Yes, there is. Just down." He said, "Would you get me a bucket of chicken?" We said, "Absolutely." So that's all we ever got him off that.
Bucket of chicken.
So much for all the other BS, And But no, he was a lovely guy. I flew a lot of the big stars of the day, a lot of Diana Ross, I flew her, Barbra Streisand, I flew Celine Dion, just delightful, lovely girl. I flew John Denver, had a great story about John Denver. John was...
he was a pilot himself.
He was. Well, yeah.
Killed himself in an aeroplane.
Yeah, would you believe, about 6 or 8 weeks after I flew him. And we took him to Melbourne to the midday show, I think it was, and Ray Martin, we had him and Ray, and just him on the way back, see. So he comes up the front, and we're driving a thing called the Beechjet 400A in about 94, 5, 6, whatever. And it had all the latest, greatest avionics in it. And he'd never seen it. I mean, he said he was a Learjet pilot, which had all the old steam-driven...
Oh, was it a crystal? It was a crystal dish.
Yeah, all the latest. It's commonplace today, of course. Oh. But back then it was like, wow, I've never seen one of these before. So anyway, he said, oh, I'm a pilot. I said, oh, yeah, you want to have a fly, John? He said, yeah. Lucky I don't fly anymore. They take my licence off. So I said, well, hop in, I'll give you a buzz. So we had a bit of a poll and whatever. He said, it was really good. So I said, no, we did the descent. Normally I said, about 10,000 feet, we need to get you out. Put my co-pilot in there. And my co-pilot was my brother-in-law, Brucey, by the way. And anyway, he was doing a great job and what have you. And I said, listen, if you just, as soon as we land and if you hop out, because they've got binoculars there, they'll see that you're a pretty high-profile bloke, and we'll put Bruce in. We don't want to get into trouble because he didn't have a Beechjet licence. He had a Learjet licence. So he landed the thing and he did a nice job. And opened the door, let him out, and he got out and he said, boys, he said, this has been the greatest day of my whole life. Hey, John. Yeah, it's been all right, but it's been good, but not that good. It must have been better. No, he said, I've had so much fun. So he said, will you come to the concert tonight? So we took Bruce, he was married to my sister, Georgina, at the time. He took her and I took Susie along. And we ended up in a hall, and this is some of the things I really admire about, the psychology of life. In a hall everywhere it was in George Street, and there was about 5,000 people there. So half men, half women. John Denver walked out and he had a guitar and a piano and no backing, nothing, did the whole thing himself. And by the time the night was over, every woman in the place would have left their husbands, me included, for John. I love John. So anyway, he gives us the tickets and we go back to the after show party. And we're in there and there's 400 of the world's greatest hangers on there, including us. And he spots us, walks straight across the edge of the room. We couldn't get rid of him. I mean, like half an hour, we're talking aeroplanes and everything we can think of. And these people are going, oh, we come to see John. And then I said 8 weeks later, poor old, he killed himself. Just terrible.
Well, it's when it's your time, as they say.
Yeah, I know what killed him, by the way. He drove a thing called an Easy. I read the report. Now, we always get we call them the comics sometimes 2 or 3 years later, but they goes right into it all. It's basically the investigation. And John, he actually had flown one before, but the one he flown had the fuel cock. They normally have them down just between your legs there, right? But this one happened to have the one over the left shoulder. So he flying along fat, dumb and happy at 500 feet. And if you lose an engine at 500 feet, you've still got
reasonable amount of time,
45 seconds to come up with a decent decision, That's why the accident statistics, by the way, are better on singles than they are on twins, because you haven't got a lot of decisions to make. You've got to find something nice and soft to land and not stall a thing in. You've got to fly it in and chances are you walk away.
Well, as they say with a twin, if one engine stops, you follow that engine towards the ground.
Yeah, well, that's saying is they got half their power on each wing. That's it. So John, he flying along, boom, boom, hiccups, running out of fuel. He probably went, oh shit. It's not the fuel cock. Oh, it's up here. So as he leaned across to change the fuel cock, he inadvertently didn't notice it, pushed the stick forward. Flew the thing into the ground. Perfectly preventable.
Yeah. Things happen. They do.
It does happen. So.
One of the questions that we ask at the end of these things is, what is the piece of advice that had the most effect on you for your career and your life? And I know it's going to be Peter Malloy. I mean, it's got to be Peter Malloy. There can be almost nobody else. But was it just one thing, or was it that whole environment that you lived with Peter over those years?
Yeah, it was the environment. I didn't get Peter's wisdom one night. I took every minute I had. I used to frustrate him, terrible, I know that, vis-a-vis our argument I was telling you about back in Auckland. Because all the mechanics, because the last thing they want some driver sitting there asking why, where, how, go away, for God's sake, go away. The advice, find something that, I think my dad gave me this, find something God gave you a bit of talent to do and be the best at it and never give up. And I also love, aviation's full of sayings, of course, motor racing's got a few, but I like that saying, if you swim with the sharks, you've got to swim with the sharks.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Exactly.
You can't get to what standard you need to by reading a book, or you've got to go and swim with the sharks.
No.
So.
Warwick, I have thoroughly enjoyed this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed chatting. You are a man with an incredible memory for things that have taken place in your life. I think that the people who listen to this podcast will have an entirely new viewpoint of your career and your personality, because I certainly do, and I really thank you very much for coming in today.
Well, the pleasure's been all mine, and thanks for having me.
Well, friends, that's the conclusion of another episode of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast series. We hope you enjoyed the tales contained herein and look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, be sure to check out musclecarmag.com.au for news stories, news and galleries from the Muscle Car Vault. We add them weekly, as well as brand new digital issues as soon as they become available on the newsstand. Thanks for listening, and as always, safe driving and happy reading from the team at Australian Muscle Car Magazine.